Thank you, everybody, and pleasure to meet you today. My name is Matt Zubiller. I'm from a company called McKesson Corporation, and we've been around close to 170, almost 180 years. And it's interesting the role that McKesson has within healthcare. We're not necessarily beholden to any particular stakeholder in the industry. So we work with health plans, we work with labs, we work with providers, all across the board. And one of the major challenges we see here is that we have a big problem about paying for all this stuff. I think it's very exciting to talk about all the potential of personalized medicine, but when it comes down to it, who's going to pay for it? And today's healthcare system just does not accommodate for that. So let's talk about healthcare reform. First, on the top of minds of pretty much everyone out there, when we talk to our provider customers, we talk to our lab customers, we talk to our health plan customers, we have the same issue, which is healthcare reform, reduce administrative costs, figure out how to reduce medical costs, figure out how to get reimbursement. And these kind of four things tend to come out. One is this increased access. Great, we increased access, but who's going to pay for it? And so what ends up happening is we see pressure down on reimbursement. Problem with those folks who have diagnostic firms in here or providers who are looking to provide personalized medicine is that the reimbursement just isn't there. And so I'm going to zoom into diagnostics specifically. When you look at reimbursement for diagnostics today, the formula for determining reimbursement is essentially based on cost. So come up with and tell us how many different methods you're using for producing your diagnostic test. And from there, we'll figure out how much that cost is, and ultimately you get paid for that. That's just not, that model doesn't work. There's not value in that model. And so when we look at the healthcare system today, being prepared for the potential that diagnostics have, it becomes a real challenge. And so when we talk to investors, so venture capitalists, the question that they ask us is, what do you see in terms of the value for these particular tests, and how is that going to help change within the healthcare system? Because payers today are just not set up to pay for this stuff. And Naomi, I think, did a great job talking about kind of the different processes you have for tech assessment. But I'll be honest, most of the folks in the health plans don't communicate with each other. So you've got people who are responsible for medical policy on one side. You've got people responsible for network policy on the other. And you've got coverage policy, and neither of the two meet. And so if you're a lab, you're developing a test, or a diagnostic firm developing a test, you don't have insight in terms of what the process is for reimbursement. Most of the time, you're focused on the science, and we've heard that today. The fact is that you need to be able to focus on how you're ultimately going to get paid for this with the current healthcare system. And what payers value most is the adoption of these particular tests in provider offices. You have a catch-22. If nobody's paying for it, how are you going to grab adoption? So I think we have a real problem with the way the healthcare system is currently set up to manage this. And that as we begin seeing healthcare reform take place, payers have a bigger issue that exacerbates all of this, is that they've got to focus on essentially MLR, medical costs, and administrative costs. MLR is supposed to be floating around 85%. The administrative costs really need to be able to be squeezed down significantly in order to be able to still make a profit and be happy. So today they're running about 15 to 17% administrative costs and medical costs at roughly somewhere between 70 to 85%, depending on how it looks. You're going to see significant reduction in administrative costs, which means fewer people to be able to interact with. Fewer people to be able to interact with on the medical policy side, fewer people to be able to interact with on the network policy side. To be able to get a contract as a diagnostic firm with these health plans is going to become more difficult. And now what makes it worse is that those people who are paying for this stuff is now beginning to shift. So with the risk of shift from health plans to providers, you've got ACOs beginning to take a role here. As a lab or a diagnostic firm, you need to be able to be accountable to them, to be able to see, well, how do you help create economic value and clinical utility for them as well? And so this becomes a very, very difficult environment to be able to grow. So with the growth of diagnostic testing, that said, we've seen tremendous growth in the past years. $8 billion industry, I don't need to tell you guys this. You guys know this. The challenge is that this is not necessarily realized today by health plans. They're unable to measure what utilization really looks like. If you're a health plan and you try to understand what utilization looks like, you try to just look at your claims data, you're going to be perplexed. You're going to be confused. So let's talk about providers first. What's important to providers? And this is a recent study done by NCCN. And providers, what they're looking for most in a test, essentially, is guidance. The very top of this list, and maybe difficult for you all to see, is sensitivity and specificity, as you expect in selecting a test. The very next down on the list is guideline recommendations. So how should I use this test and when? And right below that is cost. More than 50% of the folks are accommodating that. So the thing is providers don't know how much this stuff costs. And they don't have decision support readily available to them to make good decisions. What do the guidelines say? Compounding this, providers spend about 24 hours a year learning about new things. Right? That's 24 hours a year learning about new things. That's about anywhere between how much you work, between 2 and 3 work days, right? So the challenge is how do you get those providers to be educated? And Ted mentioned this before. One of the challenges with diagnostics in particular is it's much more difficult to educate providers about diagnostics than it is, say, about therapies. That's because therapies are very different, right? There's a whole different economic model and business model behind therapies versus diagnostics. And so, and getting the attention of the doctors is very difficult. So for payers, the real challenge when you look at this is about being able to essentially measure what good utilization looks like and then from there be able to measure value. It's almost impossible today for a payer to be able to understand what value a diagnostic test brings to their business. The way diagnostics are set up today, you essentially have now close to 100, 120 or so CPT codes that are available that describe what each tests are. There's more than close to 3,000 tests that are out there now today. And so you have roughly more than 100 CPT codes that represent a body of about 3,000 tests and growing. There's simply no match. There's no way to be able to truly understand. So when you're a health plan, I'm going to go to my claims and take a look, see what my utilization really looks like, and then tie that to my therapeutics and tie that to my surgeries. It's not possible. So as a diagnostic firm, if you're going to go to a health plan and say, reimburse me for this test because it produces value, the health plan says, show me. So for a lab, essentially you're caught in the middle. For a diagnostics firm, you're caught in the middle. You want to be able to educate your providers, be able to give them good decision support. They don't have their ears open necessarily. They don't have the time. And payers simply don't have the structure or the organization or, frankly, the tools to be able to understand what value you bring to the table. So as a lab, you're essentially caught in the middle. So collectively, as a healthcare system, what I'm proposing is we move in a different direction. Right? We move where healthcare reform is going, which is basically looking at reimbursement based on value, and as a diagnostic firm or a lab or somebody in personalized medicine, beginning to demonstrate a different type of relationship with a payer. Okay, so let's think about the dynamics here. If a payer is going to reduce the number of people that they have involved with medical policy and network policy because they can't bear the administrative burden, where can they look to help them better manage utilization? So I look at personalized medicine as a place to really be able to drive that. Diagnostics in particular, if they impact 70% of healthcare decisions, as a diagnostic firm, your value proposition no longer is, I'm going to produce a result. I'm going to produce data that can be used by a clinician. Your result, the value prop that you give, your job to be done, is essentially, I'm going to help better manage utilization of the rest of healthcare. I'm going to reduce utilization of tests, of drugs, maybe other tests, imaging, surgeries, procedures. I'm going to enable my health plans to move to risk sharing with their providers because they have more effective information now to be able to do that because of their lab partners. I'm also going to be able to move to a value-based reimbursement model, which I'm going to take risk on now. As a diagnostic or a personalized medicine firm, I'm going to say, I can produce results, I can demonstrate that to you, and in the cases where I don't get paid. That's a very compelling value proposition for health plans and payers who are a part of this. And if they're going to be shifting risk, particularly with moving to episodes of care or being able to look at bundled payment, that's the model we're going to have to go to. Otherwise, we get relegated in this personalized medicine industry as those who are essentially reimbursed based on cost, not on value. So our problem ultimately is that we don't have necessarily an infrastructure to set that up. We struggle when we talk about how payers don't listen to us or the process is opaque. We struggle when, as a health plan, because there are a lot of diagnostic firms out there, there are a lot of personalized medicine firms out there who are trying to get coverage for the things that they're offering, their solutions, but don't demonstrate utility to me. And so we're not talking with each other. There's not a common language. There's not a common technology in which we can use. One of the things we've developed is a way to be able to help support that. And we could talk about this more after the presentation, but what I suggest is a change in both the infrastructure, what we use to be able to capture data around utilization of personalized medicine, specifically in diagnostics, and be able to then measure that in an effective way that produces value. And then be able to offer a reimbursement approach that is no longer about reimburse me for all the tests that I do. It's about reimburse me for the value that I create. And I can demonstrate that to you. One of the things we've done as McKesson is we've partnered with Palmetto and with CMS to be able to deliver a new way to code and identify molecular and genetic testing. These are not new billing codes. These are not replacements for CPTs. These are identifiers. Tell me what tests are being done in this particular care event. So when a claim is submitted, you go along and you use your CPT codes, you use your billing codes as whatever you need. But in addition, you add a unique identifier to this particular care event, this particular test. So I now, as a first time, as a diagnostic firm, I'm able to measure effectively and demonstrate effectively what my utilization really looks like. That's the foundation for being able to move to value. If I can measure, I can manage. I can then help my partners who are paying entities, either the payers themselves or providers, be able to decide when and how to use these diagnostic tests, and then their incorporation into the care plan, the care path. So I believe there needs to be a shift, and I'm hoping that this is the year we can be able to do this, is to stop necessarily talking about why we're not getting reimbursed, but to move towards a demonstration of how we actually can clearly demonstrate value to these particular health plans we're working with, and then be able to be their partner. Move from just being a provider of tests and therapies to actually a partner to better manage utilization. I believe that's the promise of personalized medicine, and that's all I had to say. So thank you.